In the early 1970s, in the city of Visalia, Central California, a strange unease began to creep into the community. Initially, it was burglaries, where the thieves seemed to only take small items, personal belongings, sometimes just meaningless things. He would break into houses at night, while families were asleep, moving silently, like a ghost. He was called the Visalia Ransacker. In 1974, these burglaries began to escalate. The ransacker didn't just steal items. He began to rearrange things in the houses in a strange way, moving objects from one room to another, almost as if to taunt the homeowners. Sometimes, he would even sit in the house for hours, watching people sleep, a chilling behavior. Michael Smith, whose name has been changed based on a local resident who was affected, lived in Visalia at that time. He and his family lived in fear. They locked their doors and windows tightly, installed extra locks, but the feeling of being watched, of being violated, always lingered. One night, Michael's house was broken into. He didn't take anything of great value, just a few small items, some family photos that had been moved, and a cold, eerie feeling left in the air. It was as if a darkness had passed through their home. Then, things escalated terrifyingly. The ransacker didn't just break in. He began to commit violent attacks. The first known attack occurred in September 1975. The perpetrator broke into the home of a young couple, attacked the husband, and attempted to abduct the wife. However, the husband bravely fought back, and the perpetrator fled. A few months later, a horrifying murder occurred. The perpetrator broke into the home of a university professor, Claude Snelling, whose name has been changed based on Claude Snelling, and attempted to abduct his daughter. Professor Snelling tried to protect his daughter, but was shot dead by the perpetrator right in front of his house. The death of Professor Snelling shocked the Visalia community. People realized that the Visalia ransacker was not just a thief. He was a dangerous person, a killer. The Visalia police launched a large-scale investigation, trying to find the killer. However, the perpetrator was too cunning. He didn't leave many traces, acting mysteriously and effectively. Michael Smith and other residents in Visalia lived in fear. They didn't know who the next victim would be. The darkness from the silent burglaries had turned into real horror, haunting this peaceful city. The story of the Visalia ransacker was the beginning of a crime spree that would last for decades, spreading fear across California. After the murder in Visalia, the ransacker's crimes seemed to subside in that area. But it was only temporary. He didn't stop. He moved to another area of California. In the mid-1970s, a series of brutal sexual assaults and home invasions began to occur in the Sacramento area. Northern California, the perpetrator broke into homes at night, attacking couples and women living alone. He would tie the victims up, terrorize them with frightening words, and then commit sexual assault. Police realized it was the same perpetrator. He had a very distinctive modus operandi. He disabled phone lines so victims couldn't call the police. He used ropes or nylon cord to tie victims professionally. He wore a mask and a hood to hide his identity. These attacks occurred frequently, spreading intense fear in the community. Women living alone were scared when night fell. Couples lived in anxiety, not knowing if their home would be the next target. The perpetrator became known as the East Area Rapist, EAR, as the attacks were concentrated in the eastern part of Sacramento. Mary Peterson, whose name has been changed based on a victim or someone related to the case, lived in Sacramento at the time. She lived in a small house. And every night, she would lock her doors and windows tightly, check every corner of the house, but still felt uneasy. "I can't sleep," Mary said to her friend on the phone, her voice trembling. "Every little noise startles me. It's like someone is outside, lurking." The East Area Rapist didn't just attack. He would also call victims after the attack, taunting them, terrorizing them psychologically. He left frightening messages, showing his control and his madness. One of the most chilling things about the East Area Rapist was the way he operated. He moved silently, leaving few traces. It seemed he knew the area well. The houses, the residents' habits, like a ghost who knew his territory. Sacramento police worked tirelessly, trying to catch the perpetrator. They increased patrols, formed task forces, investigated hundreds of suspects. However, the East Area Rapist was too cunning. He was always one step ahead of the police. The attacks continued for several years, spreading terror throughout Sacramento and surrounding areas. The name East Area Rapist became a symbol of fear, of helplessness. The fear didn't just come from his violent acts. It also came from his mystery. From the way he would break into the safest places and turn them into scenes of nightmares. The story of the East Area Rapist is a dark chapter in Sacramento's history. A reminder of a predator who operated under a normal facade, sowing fear in the darkness. After years of spreading terror in Northern California, the attacks by the East Area Rapist seemed to stop in the early 1980s. Police hoped he was dead, imprisoned for another crime, or had simply stopped, but they were wrong. He only changed locations, and changed his modus operandi. In the early 1980s, a series of horrifying murders began to occur in Southern California, particularly in Orange County, Santa Barbara, and Ventura. The perpetrator broke into homes at night, attacking couples in their bedrooms. He didn't just sexually assault. He killed the victims, brutally and senselessly. Police noticed the similarity in modus operandi, breaking into homes at night, attacking couples, tying the victims up, but the level of violence had significantly increased. The perpetrator became known as the original Night Stalker, ONS. The first known murder occurred in August 1980. In Goleta, near Santa Barbara, the perpetrator broke into the home of a young couple, attacked and killed both of them. It was his first double murder. In the following years, the original Night Stalker continued to spread terror in Southern California. He broke into homes in peaceful residential areas, attacking innocent people. These murders were particularly brutal. The perpetrator used various weapons, including guns, knives, and blunt objects. He left gruesome marks at the crime scenes. Fear spread throughout Southern California. People lived in anxiety, not knowing if they would be the next target. They installed alarm systems, bought guns, but still didn't feel safe. The original Night Stalker was too cunning. He left few traces. DNA was collected at the crime scenes, but no match was found in national databases. Police in different counties of Southern California worked together, trying to find the perpetrator. They realized they were dealing with a very dangerous and professional serial killer. The fact that the original Night Stalker had a similar modus operandi to the East Area Rapist in Northern California was discussed among investigators. However, at that time, DNA technology was not advanced enough to definitively confirm this connection. The original Night Stalker's murders continued throughout the 1980s. Although the frequency was inconsistent, each crime left people living in fear and despair. The darkness of the predator had moved from the north to the south, changing shape, but the brutal and mysterious nature remained unchanged. The story of the original Night Stalker is a reminder of the brutality that can lurk in the most unexpected places, and of a perpetrator who spread terror for a decade. In the late 1980s, the attacks and murders by the perpetrator, known by various nicknames in California, seemed to stop. No more cases were recorded, and police hoped that the horrific period was over. However, for the victims' families and the survivors, the nightmare never ended. They had to live with the pain of loss and the haunting memories of what had happened. Unanswered questions always lingered. Who was the killer? Why did he do it? Would he ever be caught? The cases of the Visalia ransacker, the East Area rapist, and the original Night Stalker gradually became cold cases. Files were put into storage, but never completely forgotten. The detectives who had worked on these cases could not forget the perpetrator's brutality and mystery. They knew they were dealing with a very dangerous individual, someone who had operated for many years without being detected. In the early 2000s, a significant breakthrough occurred. With the advancement of DNA technology, investigators compared DNA samples collected from crime scenes in Northern and Southern California. The results were shocking. All the DNA samples matched. The Visalia ransacker, the East Area rapist, and the original Night Stalker were the same person. The perpetrator had been active for over a decade, from Visalia to Sacramento, and then down to Southern California, committing dozens of sexual assaults and killing at least 13 people. Police and investigators were shocked by this truth. This predator was not just a serial killer. He was a monster who had spread terror throughout California for years undetected. He became famous with a new nickname, the name that would go down in criminal history: the Golden State Killer, GSK. With the DNA evidence, the hunt for the Golden State Killer was relaunched. Investigators from different police departments in California collaborated, sharing information and evidence. However, even with the DNA, finding the perpetrator's identity was still a major challenge. The DNA in the national database had no matches. This meant that the perpetrator had never been imprisoned for a serious enough criminal offense to have his DNA sample taken. The Golden State Killer was a ghost from the past, a reminder of unsolved crimes. He might be living somewhere in California, living a normal life, while the victims' families were still suffering. The truth that the Golden State Killer was still at large made many people feel uneasy. He had escaped punishment for many years, and perhaps would never be caught. The ghost from the past still lurked, spreading silent fear. Despite strong DNA evidence, the Golden State Killer case remained stalled for many years. DNA was excellent evidence, but if the perpetrator wasn't in the database, it was just a string of meaningless symbols. Investigators didn't give up. They continued to look for new leads, re-examine old files, and try to apply the latest technologies to solve the mystery of the Golden State Killer. In the 2010s, a new method emerged, offering a final ray of hope, using public genealogy databases. Websites like GEDmatch allowed people to upload their DNA data to find relatives. Investigators came up with a bold idea: upload the perpetrator's DNA to a genealogy database, hoping to find a distant relative of his. From there, they could build a family tree and narrow down the search. It was a difficult and time-consuming task. Investigators had to sift through thousands, tens of thousands of genealogy records, searching for people who were related by blood to the perpetrator. However, Their persistence paid off. They found a few people who were distantly related by blood to the perpetrator's DNA. From there, they began to build a family tree. Going back in time, identifying potential common ancestors of the perpetrator and those distant relatives. This process took many months. Requiring meticulousness and precision, investigators had to examine each branch of the family tree, eliminating those who didn't fit. The hunt for the Golden State Killer was now more than just investigating crime scenes and interviewing witnesses. It became a search through family history, a race against time to find a predator who had hidden in the shadows for decades. Meanwhile, the Golden State Killer was living his normal life somewhere in California. He likely didn't know that modern technology was gradually tightening the noose around him. The truth that he had escaped punishment for many years, living among the community, was chilling. He was an ordinary person, with a family, friends, neighbors, but hidden beneath that facade was a brutal monster. Someone who had destroyed the lives of dozens of families. The centuries' hunt was nearing its end. The ray of hope from DNA and genealogy was gradually shining light into the darkness of the mystery. Investigators narrowed down the search to a few men living in California. Men whose profiles matched the perpetrator's characteristics and who had a blood relationship to the DNA at the crime scenes. Now, the task was to pinpoint exactly which of those men was the Golden State Killer. The hunt became more intense than ever before. After months of tireless work, investigators narrowed down the search to one man living in Citrus Heights, California. His name was Joseph James D'Angelo, whose name has been changed based on Joseph James D'Angelo. He was a former police officer, long retired. This truth was shocking to the investigators. The serial killer, the one who had spread terror throughout California for years, was a man who had once worked in law enforcement. Investigators began to secretly monitor Joseph D'Angelo. They collected DNA samples from items he discarded, such as used paper cups or tissues. They compared the DNA from those items with the DNA from the Golden State Killer crime scenes. The final result confirmed what the investigators both feared and hoped for. The DNA matched. Joseph James D'Angelo was the Golden State Killer. On April 24, 2018, Joseph James D'Angelo, at the age of 72, was arrested at his home in Citrus Heights. The scene of the arrest sent shockwaves across the country. The mysterious killer, who had escaped punishment for decades, was finally caught. When arrested, Joseph D'Angelo looked like an ordinary, frail old man. No one could have imagined that this man had committed such brutal crimes. He was charged with 13 counts of murder and dozens of counts of sexual assault. Joseph D'Angelo's double life was exposed. He lived a normal life, had a wife, children, neighbors, friends, but hidden beneath that facade was a monster. Someone who had lived a double life. A normal citizen by day, a brutal predator by night. The biggest question was why he committed those crimes. His true motive remains a mystery. Perhaps it was due to madness, due to an obsession with power and control. The fact that he was a former police officer made the case even more chilling. He used his knowledge of police procedures to avoid being caught. He knew how to cover his tracks, how to operate in the darkness. The arrest of Joseph D'Angelo brought relief to many people in California. Decades of fear finally ended. However, for the victims' families, the pain remained. They finally knew the identity of the person who had destroyed the lives of their loved ones. But that could not compensate for the loss they had suffered. The Golden State Killer, the ghost from the past, was finally revealed, but the story of his brutality and mystery will forever haunt California. After his arrest, Joseph James DeAngelo went through the legal process. Initially, he pleaded not guilty, but later, facing overwhelming DNA evidence and the possibility of the death penalty, he agreed to plead guilty in exchange for a sentence of life imprisonment without parole. Joseph DeAngelo's confession sent shockwaves. He admitted to committing all the murders and sexual assaults that the Golden State Killer had committed. In court, Joseph DeAngelo appeared frail and aged. His face showed no significant remorse or emotion as he listened to the testimonies of surviving victims and the families of those who had died. Surviving victims and the families of those who had died had the opportunity to face the perpetrator in court. They spoke of the pain, fear, and haunting memories they had endured for decades. Their testimonies were filled with tears and rage. They described the horrifying nights, the physical and emotional wounds that would never heal. One of the most memorable moments of the trial was when victims and families spoke directly to Joseph DeAngelo. They spoke of his brutality, how he had destroyed their lives, and the justice they had waited so long for. Joseph DeAngelo sat there, listening with an emotionless face. He offered no explanation for his motives, only repeating a few generic apologies. For many, Joseph DeAngelo's lack of emotion was more terrifying than his crimes. It showed that he had no conscience, no empathy. The court sentenced Joseph DeAngelo to life imprisonment without parole for all the murder charges and hundreds of years in prison for the sexual assault charges. Although not the death penalty, the sentence of life imprisonment without parole ensures that he will spend the rest of his life in prison, facing solitude and the crimes he committed. The end of the Golden State Killer case brought closure to many families. The perpetrator was finally caught and held accountable. However, the pain and loss will never disappear. This case is a reminder of the perseverance of law enforcement, the power of DNA technology in solving cold cases, and the courage of the victims and their families in seeking justice. However, it is also a reminder of the dark side of human nature, the capacity for boundless brutality that can lurk beneath a normal facade. Joseph DeAngelo, the Golden State Killer, was finally brought to light, but the story of his brutality and mystery will forever haunt California. The Golden State Killer case ended with Joseph James DeAngelo paying for his crimes. But his horrifying legacy remains. Dozens of families were destroyed by his brutal acts. Survivors have to carry physical and emotional scars for the rest of their lives. California, the shining Golden State, forever carries the memory of the years it was terrorized by the Golden State Killer. The crime scenes, from Visalia to Sacramento, and down to Southern California, became places haunted in the minds of many. The story of Joseph DeAngelo is a reminder of the frightening truth that predators can live among us, hiding beneath a normal facade, while committing the most brutal crimes. He was a husband, a father, a former police officer, but he was also a ransacker, a rapist, a serial killer. The fact that he evaded punishment for decades makes many people feel uneasy. He lived a normal life, while investigators searched for him everywhere. That shows his cunning and his ability to hide his guilt. DNA and genealogy technology played a crucial role in capturing Joseph DeAngelo. It proved that even the coldest cases can be solved with perseverance and the right technology. However, it also raised questions about privacy and ethics in using public DNA databases for criminal investigations. The legacy of the Golden State Killer is the fear he spread, the exposure of human capacity for brutality, and the reminder that justice may take a long time, but can eventually be served. Although Joseph DeAngelo has been convicted and will die in prison, his story will never be forgotten. He is a warning about the dark side of human nature, about the capacity for evil hidden within each of us. The souls who perished on those horrific nights may have finally found peace when the perpetrator was held accountable. But the pain and loss will forever be a part of the story. The Golden State Killer case is a dark chapter in California's history. A reminder that darkness can exist in the most unexpected places, and that the fight against crime is a never-ending one. If you enjoyed these true horror stories, don't forget to hit the subscribe button on the channel to follow our latest videos. We will bring you more terrifying and haunting stories. Thank you for listening.